there. Today I'd like to try a new recipe that I have never made before for a special dessert, and I'm making it for Valentine's Day. I don't know when you'll see this video, but it is something from the World War II era, from the 1940s. I found it in a magazine. It is for Karo Tea Party Tarts. So one of the ingredients didn't explain itself. It just called for short crust pastry. So I decided to look in Marguerite Patton's Victory Cookbook, which is a British World War II era collection of recipes. So I chose a short crust pastry from her cookbook from England, and then the Tea Party tart filling recipe is an American recipe. So we have a little British-English allied reunion here today in these Tea Party tarts. So the first thing I'm going to do is make Marguerite Patton's short crust pastry, and I'll move the camera so you can see what I'm doing, and then we'll go on to the tart filling. For the filling, by the way, I am cutting the filling recipe in half today because it called for a short crust pastry that used 2 cups of flour, and most of the British recipes didn't call for that great a quantity. I've noticed in all the desserts I've made, World War II era recipes from England, they were small quantities, just enough for everybody to have a little something sweet when they wanted it or were able to make it for dinner, and there weren't leftovers. There weren't a lot of extra portions left. So it's not for dozens of these tarts. It's just enough to get through one meal or one tea. So that's what I'm doing. I just cut the American half of the filling in half, and I'm going to go with what would have been made more likely in Europe or the UK at that time. So let me move the camera and I'll show you the pastry. Okay, I hope you can see this pretty well. What I have is 8 ounces, which would be 225 grams, or if you're just doing a volume measurement, about 1.5 cups of flour. The recipe said plain or self-rising, so you choose, and a pinch of salt. And then we're going to add 4 ounces, which is 110 grams, or about 1/2 cup of fat. So it said it could be margarine and lard mixed together, or butter if you have it, just whatever you have. I am using ghee, but it's better when you're making a pastry to have a chilled fat. So what I've done is put the ghee, which would normally, I keep it in my kitchen so it's room temperature and relatively soft. I have chilled this for about an hour, so the ghee is really firm. So I may have to cut it or somehow get it into smaller pieces, and then I'm going to use my pastry cutter today. If you don't have one of these, no problem at all. What you do is you take your fat and you break it in small pieces, and you just rub it like this in with the flour. And what you're doing is making little leaves. I don't know if you can see these very well. Little leaves of the fat, and they blend in with the flour. This is what makes the really nice, delicious crust, is when the fat gets mixed in with the flour, and then it melts and leaves little air pockets while it's cooking. So this time I'm just going to use my pastry cutter to get this incorporated into the flour, but you use whatever you have. So let me get this done, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so that only took about a minute, and as you can see, it's pretty well incorporated in. I can rub it in a little bit more and just continue making these leaves until, people say until it looks like small peas or something like that. I don't think it really ever looks like that. It's kind of crumbly. It looks almost like breadcrumbs, or I don't know, like a really coarse cornmeal or something. So that's what you're looking for. until you've got the fat really mixed in with the flour well. And then we're going to add cold water. When you do this, things need to be cold. You don't need anything hot. The bowl or the flour or anything doesn't need to really be hot. And you put about 1 tablespoon of cold water at a time until you just get the mixture crumbly. This is not like bread where you want to knead it for a long time. You just want it pulled together into a crumbly dough. And then we're going to get it rolled out. This recipe calls for rolling the dough out about 1/8 inch thick, which is really pretty thin. And then we're gonna cut it out into rounds. You could use another shape if you like. And then we'll put the filling on half of the rounds, and the other half of the rounds are gonna be like a donut with a hole in the center. And we'll lay those on top and then bake them. Just a little bit more. It looks like this is gonna be about 3 to 4 tablespoons of water. So that's a little bit crumbly, but that's about what I'm going for there. So let me go get these rolled out and then I'll bring you back. And also we need to do the filling together. So I'll be right back. Okay, I have it about 1/8 inch thick, and then I have 2 different sizes of cookie cutters here that I'm going to use. Sometimes you can find these that have a donut cutter insert in them, but I don't want to use that. So I'm just going to first of all cut the rounds here. Okay, I have 12 on the first go, so I'm going to leave 6 as they are, and then the other 6 I'm going to cut out the donut insert. And then I'm going to move these to a baking sheet, and the instructions say to use a greased baking sheet, so lightly greased. What I'm going to do instead, especially since fats were so scarce during World War II, and I've never seen one way or the other about parchment paper. I know paper was scarce, but perhaps not as much as fats. So I am choosing to use parchment paper instead of greasing my cookie sheet. So let me get these on and I'll be right back. Okay, so my baking tray is full. It has the 6 bases on it. And I have taken the ones where I cut the donut holes out and put them here. These are going to go on top of these after we spread a little bit of the filling on them. And then I decided, instead of re-rolling this and cutting it out again, to just leave these and make some smaller ones, because I have a cookie cutter like this that is one size smaller. So I can make some tiny little tea party tarts. So I'm going to start off with these full-sized ones first, and now let me show you how to make the filling. Okay, so this is fairly simple, and again, I have made this recipe in half. So I'm using 1/2 cup of ground nuts, and then I'm going to add 1/4 cup of Karo syrup, which is here, and you can use the light or the dark. If you are in Karo syrup is corn syrup, and you could replace this with golden syrup if that's available in your area. I think golden syrup is definitely sweeter than the corn syrup, but it would work in here. And then we're going to need 1 tablespoon of either heavy cream or evaporated milk. And then I have a pinch of salt and 1/8 teaspoon of cinnamon. And the last ingredient is going to be 1/2 teaspoon of lemon juice. And if you really like lemon, I'm sure you could add more. Probably wouldn't hurt anything. Lemons were not available in a lot of places during World War II, especially in Europe. And I wrote about this in my most recent blog post, where I'm talking about lemon drinks for a cold, how to fight a cold. So I found another British cookbook that talks about how to make a substitute for lemon juice. And what you do is you take rhubarb stems that are washed but not peeled, and you boil them in water just enough to cover for 8 to 10 minutes, and then you strain that water off and use it. You can bottle it up and store it in your refrigerator and use it as a substitute for lemon juice. I thought that was really clever. I haven't tried it yet. Maybe one day I will. Let me know if you'd like to see that. But you can get it when rhubarb is in season and make it, and then store it for when you want lemon juice if you can't get lemons. Now, so here's what we're going to do. Put just a little bit of this filling on each one. And then the recipe says to bake these at 425. Let's see for how long. About 15 minutes until they're lightly browned. And then you can serve them with additional nut mixture heaped up a little on the inside of the donut part, or if you have any left over. And you can also put a garnish on this in the center of these. It suggested a nut, like a not ground, a whole or a half nut, and a cherry, like a maraschino cherry or a glacé cherry or something like that was the other garnish it suggested. So I think I'm supposed to do this fairly thin so it won't weep too much when it's baking. We just want to get the 2 layers of the pastry together. A lot of times these World War II pastries, especially from England, where the fighting was more fierce and rationing was a lot more strict than it was here in the United States, I think. The pastries, they don't taste quite as good once they've cooled off and sat. They're really best when they're served hot right after you've made them. So that may be one reason why a lot of the British dessert recipes, or even a main dish that called for a pastry, wouldn't have a lot of leftover, and that's probably one reason why. And besides that, most people didn't have refrigerators at that time in their homes, so storing food was a lot more difficult. And with the lack of fuel and every other problem they had to overcome, I'm just amazed that they could even think about trying to put something together like this. So anyway, what we do is we press these down, pretty simple, and then we're going to bake them. And as soon as they come out of the oven, I'll be back and we'll have a look. See you in a few minutes. Okay, so here is the batch of tea party cookies or tea party tarts. And as you can see, there isn't much of the filling left that it said you could put into the center of them. But if you had a little extra, and maybe it should have been a little bit thinner on the initial layer, although I barely covered the bottom. So I don't know, but I think the pastry alone uses a very generous amount of butter for what would have been available during World War II. So this is about the most of a recipe I would make. And it said that you can garnish it with a candied cherry or with a nut. So I used these nuts in this batch I made. You could use walnuts or pecans or whatever nut you choose. I do know that nuts were, well, I have read that nuts were scarce in Britain during World War II, but I think English walnuts at least would have been available, and these are very common here where I live. So anyway, let's see what they taste like. Hold on just a moment. Okay, I can see you again, or you can see me. So I'm gonna try these. And by the way, I do like having the two different sizes. I think it's festive on this platter, and it would make a very good afternoon tea dessert. Let's see what they taste like. The short crust pastry is really good. And so is the filling. These are very lightly sweet. So they are not, they're probably what would have been normal during the 1940s, not super sweet like we have most things today, which I like. And if you did golden syrup instead of Karo syrup, the corn syrup, they would probably be really sweet. So you could choose. If you like nuts with molasses or treacle, you could probably do that too, just anything that's a syrup that would hold and not liquefy too much. So I think these are a definite winner for Valentine's Day for us. And if you make them, I hope you'll enjoy them. See you next time.